Sophia Loren and George Peppard in an incredible drama of espionage and intrigue.
In 1965, Sophia Loren was top-billed in a World War II thriller called Operation Crossbow. Her co-star was George Peppard, the man who would later become famous as Hannibal from the A-Team. On paper, it should have been perfect. Two major stars, a big-budget film, international intrigue, but what happened behind the scenes tells a completely different story. And when you understand the dynamics between these two actors, the production chaos, and what was really going on in their careers at that exact moment, you'll see why this film became one of Hollywood's most awkward collaborations. This isn't about a romance. This isn't about a feud. This is about something more interesting and more revealing about how Hollywood actually worked in the 1960s.
But I was skinny because you shouldn't laugh about that. I had nothing to eat.
I know that. You know, I am really surprised when I read your book. I read the whole book last night, that you managed to survive at times in your childhood. Because you were there during the war.
At 91 years old, Sophia Loren has seen it all. She's worked with the biggest names in Hollywood: Cary Grant, Marlon Brando, and Gregory Peck. She's won an Oscar. She's been a mother, a legend, and at one time, the very standard of beauty. But for whatever reason, no one really talks about her collaboration with George Peppard. And the reason why might surprise you more than you think. Let's start with where both of them were in 1965, because this matters more than you'd think. Sophia Loren was at the absolute peak of her career. She just won the Academy Award for Best Actress in 1962 for Two Women, the first Oscar ever given for a non-English language performance. She was an international superstar. Critics loved her, audiences worshipped her, and she was married to Carlo Ponti, one of the most powerful producers in Europe. She had leverage, real leverage, the kind of power that meant she could basically choose her projects, demand top billing, and show up to a film set knowing everyone would work around her schedule. Now, George Peppard? He was in a completely different situation. He'd had his breakout moment a few years earlier in Breakfast at Tiffany's opposite Audrey Hepburn that should have launched him into superstardom. But it didn't quite work out that way. His follow-up films were decent but not blockbusters, and by 1965, he was trapped in a frustrating contract with MGM that he desperately wanted out of. You see, MGM forced him to do Operation Crossbow. It wasn't his choice. The studio held his contract over his head and basically said, "Do this film, or you're not getting released to work anywhere else." So Peppard signed on, resentful and knowing he was being used as a contractual pawn. Already, you can see the problem. Loren shows up as the star who's doing the film as a favor to her producer husband. Peppard shows up as the guy who's being forced to be there. That's not a great foundation for collaboration, but it gets way more complicated than that.
Danke sehr, Leute. It's all right, let her go. Go my way, I'm going to go.
Shut up. If you don't shut up, we'll have to gag you.
We'll have to tell her. Your husband is dead.
Operation Crossbow had a fascinating premise. It was based on the true story of Allied spies who infiltrated Nazi Germany to sabotage the V-2 rocket program during World War II. Real history, high stakes, actual espionage. The production was massive. They had a huge cast: Trevor Howard, John Mills, Tom Courtenay, and a bunch of other British acting legends. They filmed across multiple countries. They built elaborate sets recreating Nazi rocket facilities. The budget was enormous for 1965. And then there was Sophia Loren's role. Here's where things get interesting. Loren was given top billing. Her name appears first in all the promotional materials, but she's barely in the movie. Her role is essentially an extended cameo. She appears in one sequence, plays the wife of a dead scientist whose identity Peppard's character has assumed, has a few emotional scenes, and then, spoiler alert, her character gets killed off to maintain secrecy. She's on screen for maybe 15 minutes in a 2-hour film. So, why was she top billed? Because her husband Carlo Ponti was producing the film, and they needed her name to sell tickets internationally. It was a business decision. Loren was a draw. Her face on a poster meant box office revenue, especially in Europe. But this created a bizarre dynamic on set. Peppard was the actual lead. He's in almost every scene. The entire movie follows his character's mission. He did months of work on this film. And yet Sophia Loren, who filmed her part in about a week, got top billing. If you were George Peppard, already resentful about being contractually forced into this project, how would that feel? Now, before we get into what actually happened on set, you need to understand something about George Peppard as a person, because his reputation in Hollywood was complicated.
Yes.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I met Dirk Benedict in Memorabilia 2003.
Yes.
I asked Dirk Benedict what George Peppard is like as a person. He said to me that George Peppard is very difficult to work with and he pulls pranks. I saw you on I Love 1984. You also said that George Peppard is very difficult to work with. What does Dirk Benedict mean that George Peppard is pulling pranks? And what do you mean when you say George Peppard is very difficult to work with? What is his personality like?
George was extraordinarily professional in many ways. The very first day that I came to the set of the A-Team, I walked into the makeup trailer and there was George, and he came up and said, "How do you do? George Peppard here. I'm not a very nice man." That so help me God, that was what he said to me. And no, he said, "No, I used to be a drunk. I tell everybody that. I'm not a drunk anymore. My wife says I hit her with a frying pan. She'd be dead if I'd hit her with a frying pan."
Here's something most people don't know. George Peppard was notorious for being difficult to work with. Multiple co-stars over the years described him as arrogant, temperamental, and hard to deal with. When he later starred in the A-Team in the 1980s, there were stories about him refusing to speak directly to Mr. T. He'd send messages through other cast members rather than talk to his co-star face-to-face. That's how bad his attitude could get. He had a drinking problem that got worse as his career went on. He smoked constantly, multiple packs a day, and he had this chip on his shoulder about not being taken seriously as an actor, about being seen as just a handsome leading man rather than a real talent. By his own later admission, Peppard said he could be impossible during this period of his career. He was bitter about his MGM contract. He was frustrated that his career hadn't taken off the way he'd hoped after Breakfast at Tiffany's, and he took that frustration out on the people around him. So when he showed up to Operation Crossbow, contractually obligated to be there, working alongside a superstar who was barely in the film but got top billing anyway. Yeah, that was a recipe for tension. But here's what's fascinating. There's no public record of Peppard and Loren fighting. No stories of blow-ups on set. No drama that made it into the press. And that absence of drama? That tells its own story. So here's where we get into the details that most people don't know, the stuff that reveals what was really going on. Operation Crossbow was filmed in 1964. Production took place across multiple locations, England, various parts of Europe, with elaborate studio work for the interior scenes. It was a long, grueling shoot for the main cast. George Peppard was there for months. He's in the film from beginning to end. He did his own stunts in some sequences. He learned German for his role since the film had this unusual approach where German characters actually spoke German with subtitles instead of doing the Hollywood thing where everyone speaks English with fake accents. Sophia Loren showed up for approximately 1 week of filming. Her scenes were all contained in one location, a boarding house in occupied Holland, where Peppard's character, posing as a dead German scientist, encounters the scientist's widow. Loren filmed her part, did a press conference with Peppard at the Savoy Hotel in London for publicity, and then she was done. There's a photo from that press conference. Peppard and Loren are sitting together, both smiling for the cameras. They look friendly enough, professional. But if you know what to look for, you can see it in Peppard's eyes. He's going through the motions. This is part of the job. Smile for the press. Promote the movie. Move on. And that's exactly what happened. They did their professional duty, and then they never worked together again. Never mentioned each other in interviews later in life. It wasn't a friendship. It wasn't a feud. It was just professional indifference. But the absence of a relationship is revealing in itself, because it shows you exactly how Hollywood worked and still works. Here's what nobody wants to say out loud. Sophia Loren's involvement in Operation Crossbow was basically a contractual favor that became a marketing strategy. Carlo Ponti was the producer. He could put his wife in the film, give her top billing, and use her star power to sell tickets even though she was barely in the movie. That's how the system worked. If you had the power, you used it. And look, Loren was amazing in her brief role. She brings genuine emotion to her scenes. Her character's death is one of the most affecting moments in the film. She earned her paycheck artistically, even if her screen time was limited. But the billing situation was about business, not art. And everyone on that set knew it. Peppard knew he was the lead actor doing the actual work, while someone else got the marquee spotlight. The other actors knew it. The crew knew it. And they all just accepted it. Because that's how the industry functioned. This is the thing about Hollywood in the 1960s, and really, Hollywood in any era. Star power trumps everything. Fair doesn't matter. Merit doesn't matter. What matters is who can sell tickets. Sophia Loren could sell tickets. George Peppard, despite his talent and his role in Breakfast at Tiffany's, couldn't command that same international box office pull, so she got top billing for a cameo, and he got second billing for carrying the entire film. And you know what? The movie did okay at the box office, largely because of Loren's name, so from a business standpoint, the strategy worked. But from a creative and collaborative standpoint, it created exactly the kind of environment where genuine working relationships don't form, where co-stars remain polite strangers, where resentment simmers under professional courtesy. Now, here's where we get to the heart of it. What has Sophia Loren actually revealed about George Peppard over the years? The answer is almost nothing. In her 2014 autobiography, Yesterday, Today, Tomorrow, My Life, Loren writes extensively about her career, her famous co-stars, and her experiences on various film sets. She talks about Cary Grant, Marlon Brando, Gregory Peck, Frank Sinatra, the major leading men she worked with. George Peppard? Not mentioned. Not once. Operation Crossbow gets maybe a passing reference in discussions of her filmography, but there's no story about the production, no anecdote about working with Peppard, nothing personal at all. And that omission is actually the reveal. Because Loren has been remarkably candid in her later years about her experiences in Hollywood, the good, the bad, and the complicated. She's talked about affairs, difficult directors, challenging productions. She's not someone who shies away from telling stories. But George Peppard? There's no story to tell. Because they worked together for maybe a week in 1964, did their jobs, and never thought about each other again. That's not scandalous. That's just the reality of how Hollywood worked. Two actors from completely different career trajectories thrown together for a project neither of them was particularly invested in, doing professional work without forming any real connection. Here's what happened after Operation Crossbow, because the contrast tells you everything you need to know about their careers and why this collaboration was so forgettable for both of them. Sophia Loren continued being Sophia Loren. She made more acclaimed films. She remained an international icon. She balanced her career with raising her two sons. She became more selective about her projects as the years went on, but she never stopped being a star. Even now at 91, she's still acting, still making appearances, still celebrated as one of the greatest actresses in film history. George Peppard? His career got more complicated. He finally got out of his MGM contract and did some solid work in the late 60s and early 70s, but he struggled with the bottle, burned bridges with difficult behavior, and found it harder to land major film roles as he aged. Then in 1983, he got cast as Hannibal Smith in The A-Team. And suddenly, at age 55, George Peppard became a television icon. The cigar-chomping leader of a team of mercenaries became the role he's most remembered for. It revitalized his career and his bank account. But even then, his difficult reputation persisted. The stories from The A-Team said about his conflicts with Mr. T and his controlling behavior showed that Peppard hadn't really changed. He was still that frustrated actor who felt like he deserved more respect, more recognition, more control. He died in 1994 from pneumonia, complications from lung cancer. He was 65 years old. And in his obituaries, Operation Crossbow was barely mentioned. It was Breakfast at Tiffany's and The A-Team that defined his legacy. For Sophia Loren, Operation Crossbow was just one of dozens of films in a legendary career, a minor entry in an impressive filmography. Nothing special, nothing terrible, just another project. For George Peppard, it was a frustrating contractual obligation during a difficult period in his career. A film where he did the heavy lifting, but didn't get the recognition. Just another disappointment in a career full of them. In Hollywood, the relationships that matter are the ones that leave an impression. The co-stars who challenge you, who inspire you, who you clash with, who you fall for, who you learn from. Those are the stories that get told decades later. The forgettable collaborations, the professional but distant working relationships, those just fade away. Nobody tells those stories because there's no story to tell. Sophia Loren and George Peppard worked together for a brief moment in 1964. She showed up, did her job brilliantly in her limited screen time, and moved on. He showed up resentfully, did his job competently in the lead role, and moved on. They were polite. They did press together. They never spoke again. That's not shocking. That's just reality. Not every collaboration produces friendship or drama. Sometimes two talented people work together and feel absolutely nothing about the experience. No connection, no conflict, just professional indifference. And in some ways, that's more interesting than scandal, because it reveals how Hollywood actually functions. It's not all drama and romance and feuds. Sometimes it's just business. Sometimes talented people share a set, cash their checks, and forget about each other. The real shock isn't what Sophia Loren revealed about George Peppard. It's that there was nothing to reveal. After 60 years, she has no stories about him because there were no moments worth remembering. They existed in completely different Hollywood orbits that briefly intersected for a forgettable week in 1964. Here's what this story actually reveals about Hollywood. Most professional relationships are exactly like this: cordial, professional, and utterly forgettable. We hear about the big romances: Spencer Tracy and Katharine Hepburn, Humphrey Bogart and Lauren Bacall. We hear about the legendary feuds: Bette Davis and Joan Crawford, Marlon Brando, and pretty much everyone. Those make great stories. But the vast majority of actor relationships are somewhere in between. They show up, do the work, maybe grab a drink after filming, and then never see each other again once the production wraps. No drama, no friendship. Just two professionals doing a job. The Loren Peppard situation is interesting precisely because it's so uninteresting. It shows you the machinery of Hollywood stripped of any romantic or dramatic veneer. It's about contracts and billing and marketing and two people from different worlds who happen to overlap for a minute before going their separate ways. Operation Crossbow came out in April 1965. It did decent business, nothing spectacular. Critics praised the production values and the performances, but found the plot a bit talky and slow. It's been largely forgotten except by World War II film enthusiasts. Sophia Loren went on to make Marriage Italian Style that same year, which earned her another Oscar nomination. George Peppard made The Third Day with his then-wife, Elizabeth Ashley, which was forgettable. Their paths never crossed again. No reunion projects, no retrospective interviews where they reminisced about the old days. Just silence. And maybe that's the most Hollywood story of all. Two talented people, one legendary career, one troubled one, briefly intersecting and then diverging forever. No hard feelings, no warm feelings, just indifference. So, at 91, what has Sophia Loren revealed about George Peppard? In interviews, in her autobiography, in public appearances over the past 60 years? Nothing. Not one word, not one story, not one memory worth sharing. And you know what? That makes perfect sense. Because sometimes the absence of a story is the story. Sometimes the most revealing thing is what people don't say, what they don't remember, what didn't matter enough to leave a lasting impression. George Peppard was a complicated, difficult, talented actor who struggled with his demons and his career. Sophia Loren was and is a legend who worked with the best of the best and has countless stories worth telling. Their week together on a film set in 1964 didn't produce any of those stories. They thought they were making an important World War II thriller. It turned out to be a minor entry in both their filmographies. Peppard thought he was being treated unfairly with the billing he probably was, but that's Hollywood. Loren showed up for her contractually obligated cameo appearance courtesy of her producer husband. That's also Hollywood. Neither of them knew their brief collaboration would be so utterly unremarkable that 60 years later, there would be literally nothing to say about it except to marvel at how thoroughly professional and forgettable their working relationship was. And maybe that's the real revelation. Not every Hollywood story is dramatic. Sometimes it's just two professionals doing a job, cashing a check, and moving on with their lives. No romance, no feud, no scandal. Just work. Welcome to the reality of Hollywood. It's less glamorous than you think. And sometimes, the most interesting thing about a collaboration is that there's absolutely nothing interesting about it at all. So, what do you think about this? Let us know down in the comment section. Also, be sure to like, share, and subscribe. See you in the next one.